What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So now that we are deeply through the second round, every single series has played at least 4 games, and 3 out of the 4 series are very close at this point, either being 3-2 or 2-2. The only one that's not is the Dallas Stars up 3-1, my Stanley Cup pick, thank God. But I thought that we'd update my Stanley Cup odds. I've done this once a week, basically since the playoffs have started. I go through every single team that remains. In this case, it's 8 teams, it might be 7 after tonight, and assign a percentage mark where I think that their Stanley Cup odds line up right now. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Let's get right into it. Up first, the New York Rangers. I'm going to go with the 12% chance, 1 in 8 chance roughly when looking at them and the Carolina Hurricanes. Carolina definitely has won the last 2 games. They have the momentum. I still think the New York Rangers are technically favored in this series considering they are up 3-2, but I don't think it's maybe like the traditional 3-2 where you'd think that that team would be favored like 65-70% chance to win the series. I think considering the circumstances of the last 2 games and even the series on the whole, I'd say it's more so like a 57-43 percentage in terms of who's going to advance out of this series. Carolina, if we're being honest, they probably should have won 1 out of those first 3 games. It wasn't like New York was dominant in those first 3 games. It was more so Igor Shesterkin kind of stood on his head, especially in game 2 and 3. So in looking at it, New York still should take care of business. They still should be able to win 1 out of the next 2 games. But going forward, I think that I'd probably pick against them against the Florida Panthers, but it would be a 55-45% kind of series. And then in the Stanley Cup final, who knows? So at this point, they have like, I'd say a 57% chance first round, 45 second round, then like 45 Stanley Cup final. I think that equates to roughly like 12%, basically 1/2 each way. That gets you to the 12% that you need for the New York Rangers. I think that's a fair percentage. Next up, the Boston Bruins. I'm going to go all the way down to 3% for Boston. When looking at it, they are facing a 3-2 deficit. They did win last night to make it 3-2 after being down 3-1. They looked very good. I'm not going to lie. They outplayed the Florida Panthers. They deserved to win that game. They were very aggressive, but overall, I think Florida is still going to win this series when looking at it. I don't think that they're going to choke. That would be insane if last year Boston blows a 3-1 lead to the Florida Panthers and then Florida Panthers blow a 3-1 lead to Boston. But I still think Florida's the better team. I think they're going to take care of business probably in game 6. And when looking at it, they're going to get a couple days of rest before they play the winner of the Rangers and Carolina, because I think that is going 7. I think if the Rangers were to win that series, they're going to win in 7. Carolina's not losing on home ice after winning 2 straight. So for Boston, 3%, even if they somehow pull off the upset against the Florida Panthers, they're going to be pretty heavy underdogs against either the Rangers or Hurricanes, and then they're going to be underdogs in the Stanley Cup final. So, yeah, like a 10-15% chance of even making it out of next round, and then beyond that, it'd be like 30-35% in the following series. Next up, Dallas Stars! My Dallas Stars. I am so happy that I could finally say this. I think that they're the favorite right now, considering they are up 3-1. I know that might be a hot take, but it's not a hot take. 26%. 26% for the Dallas Stars. It's still not over against Colorado. Colorado is a very dangerous team, even with the Trushkin out. They did get Jonathan Drouin back, but Tage hopefully should draw back into the Lorana. Well, not really, hopefully. I hope he kind of sits out, not going to lie, although I love Devon Taves. But for my Dallas Stars, I hope that that does not happen. But Colorado's still a very dangerous team. If there was a team that could pull off a 3-1 series comeback, I would not bet against McKinnon and McCarr and Rantanen, considering how bad they've played right now. They're going to come out with everything in the chamber in Game 5. So still got to get by that. I'd still say a 90% chance that they go on to advance. And then when looking at it, I'm not that impressed with either the Canucks or Oilers, if I'm going to be honest. Canucks, more so their 5-on-5 play. Oilers, their goaltending. So I think they would be a decent favorite in that Western Conference final. And then the Stanley Cup final, it's going to be a pretty decent team that they play in the Eastern Conference. Basically a coin flip at that point. So I think with them being by far the safest team right now in the first round, you got to make them the Cup favorite. 26% for my Dallas Stars. Vancouver Canucks, 10%. 10% for the Vancouver Canucks. Definitely stinks that they did lose that game 4 against the Edmonton Oilers. Although Edmonton was the better team in that game, you tie it up late, you hope to get the overtime, and then anything could happen in overtime. I'm going to go 10%. I still think that they probably are underdogs at this point against the Edmonton Oilers. I just think that Edmonton has been the better team at least 3 out of these 4 games for the most part. So when looking at Vancouver, still a decent chance to win the Stanley Cup. Again, a healthy 10%. Shilov's has been good. Maybe they get Demko back. If they win this series, I could easily see them going on a deep run and winning the Stanley Cup, but right now they are in the bottom 3 in terms of Stanley Cup odds and a pretty safe number 3 a pretty safe. They're 6th overall. They're not dead last compared to the 2 other teams at the bottom. They're a decent amount ahead of that. But at this point, Vancouver losing that game 4 was pretty massive, and I think Edmonton will go on to win their series. Carolina, I had the Rangers at 12%. I'm going to have Carolina at 13%. I know what you're saying. Didn't you say, Mike, that the Rangers have a 57% chance of beating Carolina Hurricanes in this series at this point? I did. But when looking at this, who do I think would have the better chance to win in the Eastern Conference Finals? Who do I think would have the better chance of winning at the Stanley Cup Finals? If they were to advance out of this second round, I think it is Carolina, especially if Carolina comes back and pulls off this 3-0 comeback. The amount of momentum, the amount of belief that this team is going to have, they might be unstoppable. They might be unstoppable if they come back from a 3-0 series lead. And the fact that it wasn't like a demoralizing 3-0. They were playing just as good as the New York Rangers, just didn't get some bounces. Igor Shesterkin stood on their heads. So I think that Carolina does technically have a better chance overall, even though I would pick the New York Rangers at this point to win their series. I think in the Stanley Cup Final and the Eastern Conference Final, I would say Carolina has a better odds to win than the New York Rangers. So as a result, Carolina 13%, New York Rangers 12%. Carolina's still down 3-2. I can't give them like 15, 16%. That'd be ridiculous. But I do think a healthy 13% is fair. Colorado, 2%. It kind of stinks. They're my least likely right now, considering they are down 3-1. They are heading to Dallas for this game 5 tonight on away ice. They need to win 3 straight games in order to win this series. I do have them even below the Boston Bruins, although I think if both teams somehow pull off the 3-1 comeback, I would have Carolina much higher, but being down 3-1 versus 3-2 is massively different. Just their stars have not shown up. And yes, their stars have in part not showed up because the Stars, that was really corny what I just did, because the Stars have shut down their stars, but Makar hasn't scored in the last 3 or 4 games. McKinnon has 1 assist in the last 3 or 4 games. Rantanen 1 goal. They have just been neutralized, and when you don't have Nichushkin, when you don't have Devontae, your depth really gets exposed. I thought they were kind of weak in terms of depth, in terms of top-tier contenders, but when you don't have 2 of your 5 best players, you're going to get exposed. Georgiev just not that impressive in that game 4. I wouldn't pin it on him by any stretch, don't get me wrong, but at this point, I think Colorado, we can all admit they're probably going to lose in the first round. If they somehow pull this off, they'd be up there with, I think that I maybe even picked them over the Edmonton Oilers or the Vancouver Canucks based on what I saw. But right now, it's not looking good for the Colorado Avalanche. Next up, second to last, Florida. Florida, I'm going to go with 19%. I think they still take care of business against the Boston Bruins, but it's not over by any stretch, especially as they're heading back to TD Garden for Game 6. I would maybe even favor the Bruins. I still think Florida's probably taking business, but that's basically a coin flip game. And then in Game 7, anything can happen. But at this point, up 3-2 against what I think is an inferior team. I think they might have some additional rest heading into that New York Rangers vs. Carolina Hurricane series. And they're clicking on basically every single level. I've been impressed with their forward scoring, forward depth. Defense core has held their own. Brandon Montour has looked great, and Bobrovsky has been solid in net. I still think Florida is a very high-end contender, and they've proven that throughout the playoffs. Even though I don't think that they've played the hardest competition, they probably had the easiest path to the conference finals, maybe Edmonton as well, but Vancouver's actually looked very, very solid with Shilov's playing good. So when looking at Florida, I think that they're probably going to, at this point, they would be my Eastern Conference team to make, they'd be my pick to make the Stanley Cup Final just because they're up 3-2 against an inferior team compared to Rangers and Carolina just beating the holy hell out of each other. And that's probably going to go 7. And then lastly, the Edmonton Oilers. I'm going to have them at 15%. The goaltending is very scary. Do not get me wrong. I thought Calvin Pickard looked very good in that game 4. He had a shutout the first 2 periods. He was very, very good. But I still think even with the question marks in goal, I think their 5-on-5 play, and especially their special teams, is good enough to carry a Calvin Pickard, even if he's only giving you 890, probably not 890, even 900 save percentage. I think that's going to be enough for the Edmonton Oilers to potentially go on a cup run. They just got to avoid the Stuart Skinner disaster classes of an 840 save percentage game when he allows 4 goals on 30 shots. That's just what they have to avoid at this point. The disaster. You just need to get okay goaltending from Calvin Pickard, who was actually pretty solid in regular season. He had a 909 save percentage. So although Edmonton, I don't have like the utmost faith in them to win the Stanley Cup, I'd pick against them when they play the Dallas Stars. I think they would be the 3rd best chance right now. Against Vancouver, I'd say there's a 64% chance they go on to win that series, even though it is tied 2-2. I do have faith in them to take care of business, especially the last game. They definitely were the better team. Vancouver still can beat them. Don't get me wrong, 10% versus 15%. I'm not saying the Edmonton Oilers are a far, far better team, but I have Edmonton right now at a healthy 15%. So here's the overall. Dallas, 26%. Florida, 19%. Edmonton, 15%. Carolina ahead of New York, despite being down 3-2, 12%. Vancouver, still a healthy 10%, especially if they can get Thatcher Demko back. That'll be very big for them, even though Shillovs has been good. Then then there's a decent drop-off, obviously, with Boston Bruins being down 3-2 at 3%, in the Colorado Avalanche being at 2% because they are down 3-1 to the Dallas Stars. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Dallas has been my cup pick throughout. Carolina was my Stanley Cup final pick. Carolina's got a long way to go to make that happen, but I'm feeling good about my Dallas Stars right now, especially if they take care of business in 5. Edmonton versus Vancouver is going at least 6. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? What do you think about these odds? Who'd you move up? Who'd you move down? Let me know in the comments. What do you think? I'll be seeing the next one.